Hello, everybody. So today I will be talking about child maltreatment and intimate partner violence. My ethnic group was Hispanic, and then my partners were Ashlyn, Katarina, and Lexi. Today I will be talking about what exactly IPV or child maltreatment is, what research has been done on this topic, a brief summary of our interview with Brianne Ward, and then our reflection, as well as a small little TED Talk at the very end. So, child maltreatment is all types of abuse and neglect against a child under the age of 18 by a parent, caregiver, or a person in custodial role. And examples of this is your mom and dad, or if your grandparents were taking care of you, or it could be a nanny. Types of abuse include physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. And then long-term impacts on physical, mental health, social and cognitive functioning, and well-being over the lifespan. IPV or intimate partner violence, the definition is abuse or aggression that occurs in a romantic relationship. This can be with previous or current partners, and then the types of abuse include physical, sexual, emotional, and financial. A couple examples of financial would be if your partner freezes your credit to where you are no longer able to get a new credit card or a new bank account when you do need to leave a situation. This really keeps the person trapped in that relationship. Another example of financial would be holding all the money or keeping track of the money very closely and not letting your partner spend any of that money for a specific reason. The impacts of this are long-term and short-term, physical mental health as well as social and cognitive health. The correlation between IPV and child maltreatment. Exposure to IPV is often recognized as a form of child maltreatment, and then child maltreatment occurs in a high percentage of families where IPV takes place. Both child maltreatment and IPV share similar consequences. The reason for the second one is typically when there is IPV and maltreatment happening at the same time, it's emotional and physical. So there is an aggressor in the household. So now I'll be talking about our application and reflection. We'll begin with this small little video that talks about the typical things in a Latinx mental health Latinx has to go through in their mental health on a daily basis.
Hi, my name is Gabriela Nagy. I am a health disparities researcher and I work primarily with the Latinx community. Mental health problems are difficult for everyone. That can be because it can impair someone's functioning across different domains. For example, in their employment, in their relationships with their loved ones, or otherwise. But there are also unique challenges that Latinx individuals are facing, not necessarily because of their culture or anything about their identities, but more because of the environment that they're living in, which may lead to experiences like discrimination and exclusion. And this can range from being subtle microaggressions, which may be sort of ambiguous words or even exchanges that people might have, all the way to very blatantly discriminatory actions. There can also be other instances like being mistaken for somebody else, being talked over, being excluded from certain services or conversations. It could be sort of like death by a thousand paper cuts, in that the day in and day out of having those experiences can really wear on an individual's well-being. For children, for example, it can be really challenging to learn a language more quickly, but then be asked to be an interpreter for one's whole family. At the adolescent stage, there may be challenges with developing your identity, and you may be experiencing some pressure from your family to maintain those traditional roots, while at the same time getting pressure from your friends to adopt more mainstream American values and traditions. When Latinx immigrants face things like language barriers, that really makes it hard for them to navigate complex systems, whether they be the educational system or the health system. And so what it means is that they may not be getting the care that they need or the services that they need that can support their adaptation to this country. A common story that I've heard is coming to the United States to provide for your family, and getting here and having to find any kind of job, but that it may not actually pay you the minimum wage or even afford you vacation time. And That kind of a job may be really physically demanding. It also pulls you away from spending time with your children, the very reason why you chose to make this journey to the United States. That can give rise to things like stress and depression and anxiety, and this really becomes a larger issue taking into account the fact that they may not have enough access to providers who are culturally and linguistically available to give them health care that they need. Latinx individuals, whether they are immigrants or not, may still experience discrimination in the workplace or in healthcare settings, or even just socially walking down the street. What can happen is that the most vulnerable members of the Latinx community, for example, low-income individuals or undocumented individuals, are pushed to the margins. They are quite resilient and have to overcome a lot of those challenges, but can you just imagine what it might be like if they didn't have those barriers in the first place?
So, as the video talked about, cultural background shapes how your family understands teen mental health and how comfortable they feel talking about it. They have so many different barriers that we may not have that we really need to take in consideration. One thing that I absolutely love about the Latinx family is their strong family connection, but there can also be that pressure to stay strong and avoid emotional struggles, as well as if there is IPV or child maltreatment going on within that family, it would possibly be a lot harder to reach out for help. Teens adapt quickly to mainstream culture while parents hold on to traditions, which can lead to misunderstandings about the stress, school pressure, or counseling. Language differences and concerns about stigma can make it harder for parents to seek support. Keeping these cultural dynamics in mind helps create parent education that feels respectful, accessible, and aligns with the family values, which is very important. So, one of my groupmates' key findings is child maltreatment increases youth violence and adult IPV. The youth violence is a major pathway, and then gender differences in how violence develops, and then context matters such as your poverty levels, your education, and your neighborhoods. I feel like this slide is more saying how generations do matter. Like how you grew up does matter most of the time. If you are in a very low poverty and wealth level and you don't have a great education and school system and you're in a very bad neighborhood, statistically you are not as likely to succeed as somebody who has a very high poverty or high financial level, a great education, and they have an amazing neighborhood that can support them. So just really looking at the bigger picture is really important for a lot of things. So few interventions are culturally adapted for the Latinx immigrants. Only 8 of the 32 RCT supported programs address their needs, and then immigration-related trauma is under-addressed as well. Only 9 interventions target it, and then none of them are well supported. And ecological approaches are rare as well. Only 9 interventions tackle the systematic challenges for immigrants. This slide really shows how poorly we are trying to adapt and help them, and I feel like that's a very important thing because we need to be not only creating these interventions, but creating accessible interventions that are needed and used throughout. Children are exposed to intimate partner violence, IPV, are more likely to show more emotional behaviors. Behavioral outcomes varied across ethnic groups, such as white families are likely to seek formal services such as counseling. Black families often rely on extended families and community networks, and then Hispanic families are likely to rely on that extended family support and values, emphasizing that family cohesion. Key findings of the considerations for best practices is shifting from the failure to protect, holding the person who used violence accountable rather than the parent who experienced the abuse. Sorry, I had to cough. Um, Practicing the cultural humility, never assuming a person's situation and learn their whole story. Keeping the child in safe care. We want to work to keep the child in the care of the person who experienced the IPV, but if it's not safe, it's not safe, and the child does need to get somewhere that is safe. Increasing coordination, connecting people and families with other agencies and organizations. Here in the Cedar Falls, Waterloo area, we have a couple different shelters and resources for people who experience domestic violence, such as Riverview Center, the Friends of the Family, House of Hope. I know another organization that helps a lot of people is the Boys and Girls Club. And all of these organizations really network with each other and network outside of each other. For example, I know Friends of the Family really prioritizes housing. So they work with different landlords that will help them and accept their little stipends for their housing because they believe housing is super, super important. So really just connecting with those agencies and organizations to make sure that every square inch of what is needed is covered. So our interview is linked here, but you guys have it in another place as well. Our interview, we talked to Brianne Ward, the CEO of Forward Counseling in Des Moines. Brianne's a licensed mental health counselor and is certified with the rehabilitation counseling and a strong background in crisis intervention, youth services, and trauma-focused work. She holds a bachelor degree in child, adult, and family services from ISU and a master's degree in counseling from Drake University. Our interview findings, we need to focus on understanding a person's story instead of judging why they stay or leave. I've said that a couple of times throughout our presentation. You don't know the person's story. Um, you don't know what's happening with them. So instead of judging on them, be there for them and support them is really, really important. And then a common misconception is that children don't notice violence, but even an infant can pick up on safety cues. I like to talk about a lot of media does show you and convey to you that children do see what's going on. I would like to talk about a lot of the different types of media where the mom and dad are fighting and screaming at each other. And then the child, and it's typically a brother and a sister, are hiding in a bedroom on their bed, and the older one is comforting the little one. So there is that as well. Brianne's agency works with services like parent coaching, supervised visitation, and culturally specific programs. We also put a picture of a billboard sign here, and then it is a picture of a little boy or a little girl, and the translation is it scares me to hear them fight. Typically, if the parents are fighting, a child can become scared because they're like, what happens to mom or dad, and then what is possibly happening to me next? So our interview findings, Brianne uses therapeutic approaches such as EMDR, internal family systems, narrative therapy, and trauma-informed care. She stresses the importance of collaboration, referrals, and wraparound services so that clients don't have to retell their story repeatedly. I was able to go to Scotland with Dr. Fleming last year, and one of their statistics and research points is that it takes about 3 years for a person to go through the entire court system, and most victims don't actually go through that court system because because of how many times they have to retell their story. They say it's worse going through court than being sexually assaulted, which is a very, very sad thing, and it's something that we need to take into consideration when looking at these things. Overall, Brianne highlighted that domestic violence and trauma work is complex, individualized, and centers on patient safety and trust. For our annotated bibliography, these are just some of the theories that I grabbed out that I feel were really important. So the social ecological model, the Duluth model, the cognitive behavioral theory, and then development trauma pathways theory. So now I will have a TED Talk video play.
We are here today to face our past and reclaim our lives as survivors of child abuse. We know intuitively or objectively we were physically, sexually, or emotionally abused as children. We believe our abuse affected who we are as adults today. We are determined to remake our lives by taking back what was once taken from us: our innocence, our power, our right to determine who we are and how we live in this world. The adult, while healing from child abuse, will go through 3 stages: the remembering, the mourning, and the healing. There are many steps to accomplish along the way, the hope being that we go from being victims to being survivors to becoming thrivers. I am an adult survivor of childhood sexual abuse. Now, right now, I am healed, happy, and thriving. But it hasn't always been this way. Back in 2006, I was triggered. Now, a trigger is an emotional or physical sensation that you get that brings up past dormant memories. So back in December of 2006, a disheveled homeless man approached me and said to me, "Perform sexual act on him." I was scared. So frightened to death, I got into my car and I drove 45 minutes home, shaking from the experience. Now, many of you may have had this happen and you would have just brushed it off and gone on with life. But within days of this assault, I began having dreams, memories, flashbacks, and nightmares of being molested as a little girl. Within a few years of that, I developed anxiety, depression, I became agoraphobic, and an alcoholic, a 6-bottle of wine a day drunk. I was drinking back the pain and the memories. I was a mess and devastated by the reoccurring thoughts and feeling once again a victim. By 2010, I was suicidal. Now, I only have a little while with you today, so it's difficult in that amount of time to describe how horrible it is for a survivor to remember the abuse and to feel once again violated, isolated, and alone. I can talk to you forever about my issues, relationships, promiscuity, some cutting, suicide attempts, as well as subsequent hospitalizations and psychological diagnosis. But I'm not today. But what I will tell you is that by the time we finish talking here today, at least one adult survivor of child abuse will commit suicide. There are over 3 million reports of child abuse each year: physical, sexual, emotional, and neglect. Now, when I talk about sexual abuse, I'm including being touched, inappropriate, non-consensual sex, online predators, as well as seeing any kind of pornographic images as a child. So what happens to these abused children when they grow up? Well, in jail. 30% of women in jail report having been sexually abused as a child. That number is 62.7% for men being abused as children, which is twice the frequency that's seen in the general population. 60% of survivors in drug rehab programs have reported being abused as children. And psychological damages. 80% of 21-year-olds who were abused as children have met the criteria for at least one psychological disorder. Now, some sexually abused children grow up to be sexual predators. And some abused children grow up and abuse their own children, continuing the cycle of abuse. Now, how did we get there? How did we wind up in those circumstances? Well, there's a stigma. And because there's a stigma, we don't tell you. And because we don't tell, you may think this is not happening in your world. But the adult survivors are living with the pain and the guilt and the shame. They are internalizing it, questioning, why did this happen to us? Wondering why no one helped us, and living our lives with the devastation and impact the abuse has had on our lives. Now, you know what it's like. You go and tell someone some sad, dark, secret, or devastating news, and they say to you, oh, it'll be okay. Time heals all wounds. Or they act as if you're supposed to just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. Well, back when I was 13, the summer when I was 13, nature called and I became a woman. So I went into my aunt's room unsure of what was going on, and I shared with her, and she gave me the sex talk. And when she finished, I said, then so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so had sex with me when I was a little girl. And this favorite aunt of mine said to me, girl, you don't go around telling folks stuff like that. You keep that to yourself. And that's what I did. I kept the secret. Now, not all adult survivors are in jail, on drugs, beating or molesting their children. In fact, most often you will find us in your everyday life situation. We are your siblings, your co-workers, your close friends, your teachers, your doctors, and your neighbors. We come from a diverse background of race, gender, nationality, religion, and socioeconomic status. We are you. The thing that most adult survivors have in common is that we just want to heal. Oftentimes, it takes a trigger to happen in the adult life, and it all comes rushing back. A jingling of a key, a smell, a sensation. And some of us would go and Google adult survivors of child abuse, child sex survivor, seek a therapist, or have the therapist refer to them as support group. That's what I did. I saw a therapist, I joined a support group, and I did the work. In fact, I started a support group in Atlanta for adult survivors of child abuse, and I've been facilitating those meetings for 5 years. And what I have found is that the number one frustration amongst survivors is the not being believed when they told. That happened to me. A few years ago, I told, and I was not believed. And remember, at 13, I was told to never tell. So, oftentimes someone will bring you some issue or problem and they don't offer you a solution. Well, I'm not going to do that to you today. In fact, it's my intentions to have us on the same page, where you can look to your left, look to your right, behind you, and in front of you, and have a positive, powerful impact on another survivor's life. Since 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys will be abused by the age of 12, in a group of 5, this talk is about at least 1 or maybe 2 of us. So I want you to think about the adult survivor of child abuse that you know, or that you've suspected all along was abused. And if you are the survivor, I want you to think about yourself. Now, what support can you offer to the survivor? 5 things. First, believe the survivor. Believe the survivor. And if you are the survivor, trust your memories. Second, do not say, unless you also are a survivor of child abuse, that you know how they feel, because you don't. But what you can offer is this. It was not your fault. Third, become the love, the support, and compassion that all survivors deserve. And fourth, encourage the survivor to get help and to heal. And lastly, the fifth thing, understand that healing is a journey. In fact, I kept a journal through the stages and steps of my healing. And by the time I finished writing the journal, I had written 636 pages. And I call this book Journal of a Suicide Failed. I encourage all survivors to keep a journal so you can look back over your accomplishments and see the progress you're making. One of the things I say to survivors when they come to their first meeting is this: this is hard work. But I always add, but it's worth it. I am Fire Brown. I'm an adult survivor of child abuse. I'm healed, I'm happy, and I'm thriving. Thank you for your time.
So I want to first say thank you for listening to that. I know it can be really, really hard. But for me, a couple key takeaways from that video was how sometimes, like I said, it's generational. Looking at the statistics that she discussed, it's a circle. And that's really, really sad because it shows that we are not giving them the resources and opportunity that they need to get out of that generational abuse. So yeah, I also wanted to say re-say the statistics she said about how many people, because it is very, very possible that you all know somebody or that you have had this happen to you, and I am so sorry. One in four girls, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys. So with that, I want to end it with just saying that you guys are all loved and you guys are all worthy. UNI does have a support group, and there are many, many agencies here in the Cedar Valley that can help you. So yeah. Well, thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you have a great rest of your day and good luck on finals.